I'm Henry Bean, and you're listening to The World is Wrong podcast. Oh, Frank, you celebrated Frank?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, do I love that movie.
Isn't it so good?
That's a great movie. And his next movie I thought was at least as great.
Room?
The Room. I thought Room and Frank were two movies with totally happy endings that I thought were completely earned. I was thrilled by both of them. I know a lot of people don't like Room as much, but the world is wrong about that.
We're here to tell you how the world is wrong. The world is wrong about the believer.
Dr. Lieber. Welcome to The World is Wrong, an extremely positive podcast where we celebrate films and film artists the world is wrong about. My name is Andras Jones, and I am one of your hosts.
And my name is Brian Connolly, and I'm one of your hosts. But not today, sadly.
Well, you're still the host. We have a guest.
Yeah.
You're basically here to welcome our guest and then take off because you got bigger things to do than hang out at our little party, but then you come back to the end. We're talking with the director of this film, The Believer, Henry Bean. We're also going to be talking with the producer, Christopher Roberts, in a sort of a Part 2 episode that's going to be released on the same day. So, we're going to be talking about The Believer here. We're going to get into it with you a little bit at the end, Brian, but is there anything you want to tell people before we dive into this?
Just definitely watch the movie. When I first saw this movie, I didn't really know anything about it. I saw it because of you. You lent me your copy at the time, and you said, you should watch this movie. And this was before I knew who Ryan Gosling was or anything. And, you can hear the plot, of the movie and kind of have an idea. But what you get, I think, is very different, as you will understand when you hear this interview as well. But yeah, I think definitely seek it out and watch it.
And the plot simply is, it's a true story about a Jewish Nazi from New York who gets outed by the New York Times and kills himself. And it's a comedy.
There might be spoilers. There might be spoilers. There might be spoilers.
Hey, Guy Danielson.
You look different at that meeting.
Well, So the other night, you said that you thought the modern world was a Jewish disease. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
In the movement, this racialist movement, we believe there's a hierarchy of races, Whites at the top, blacks at the bottom, Asians, Arabs, Latins, somewhere in between. Why are you writing this down if you're recording it?
It helps me concentrate. Danny, what about the Jews?
Jews, Judaism, it's like a sickness.
How is Judaism a sickness?
Take sexuality.
Sexuality?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
You ever fuck a Jewish girl?
What?
You ever fuck one?
Well, yeah, I've been out with a Jew.
There you go. What did you notice?
Like what?
Jewish girls love to give head. Right?
Yeah, sure. I don't know. Is that right?
And Jewish men love to get it.
Everybody likes to get it.
Yes, it's very pleasurable, but Jews are obsessed with it. You want to know why?
Yes. Why?
Because a Jew's essentially female.
Female.
Yeah. Real men, white, Christian men, we fuck a woman, we make her come with our cocks. But a Jew doesn't like to penetrate and thrust. He can't assert himself in that way, so he resorts to these perversions. Oral sex is technically a perversion, you know that, right?
Yeah.
So that's why after a woman's been with a Jewish man, she's ruined. She never wants to be with a normal partner again.
So the Jew's a better lover.
Well, he's not better. That's not what I said. I said he gives pleasure. That's actually a weakness.
All right, so it's not that the Jew runs the media or that he owns all the banks. It's that they're sexually corrupt.
The Jews clearly control the media and the banks. Investment banks, not the commercial ones. But the point is, they carry out in those realms the exact same principles that they display in sexuality. They undermine traditional life, and they deracinate society. deracinate, tear out the roots. A real people derives its genius from the land, from the sun, from the sea, from the soil, you know? This is how they know themselves. But, like, Jews don't even have soil.
Yes, Israel.
Yeah, those aren't Jews.
Of course they're Jews.
Notice the Israelis. It's a fundamentally secular society. They no longer need Judaism because they have soil, because the real Jew is a wanderer. He's a nomad. He's got no roots and no attachments, so he universalizes everything. He can't hammer a nail or plow a field. All he can do is buy and sell and invest capital and manipulate markets, and, you know, it's like all mental. He takes the life of a people that's rooted in soil, and then he turns it into this cosmopolitan culture based on books and numbers and ideas, and, you know, this is his strength. You can take the greatest Jewish minds ever. Marx, Freud, Einstein, what have they given us? Communism, infantile sexuality, and the atom bomb. In the mere 3 centuries, it's taken these people to emerge from the ghettos of Europe. They've ripped us out of a world of order and reason. They've thrown us into a chaos of class warfare, irrational urges, relativity, into a world where now the very existence of matter and meaning is in question. Why? Because it's the deepest impulse of a Jewish soul to pull at the very fabric of life till there's nothing left but a thread. They want nothing but nothingness. Nothingness without end.
Wow. Danny, this is great. You're incredibly articulate. But one thing. How can you believe all of this when you're a Jew yourself?
Excuse me?
Do you know a Rabbi Stanley Nadelman? He was at the congregation Ohev Zedek.
Who? How would I know him?
He said you were bar mitzvahed there in March of 1988.
He said, and you believe that? And you call yourself a real reporter?
Okay, so you're saying that that's not true.
Do I look Jewish to you? Look at this.
Were you ever bar mitzvahed anywhere else?
Do you have any idea who you fucking with here?
No. Who am I fucking with here?
Not a what? Fuck you.
Why would Nadelman lie to me?
To discredit me. I know who they are. I already explained this to you, guy. These people can say and do anything, and they will. It's all narrative. Are you gonna put what he said in your paper?
Well, give me a reason not to.
Because it's slander. Because it's reckless disregard. Because I'm gonna sue your fucking Jew paper, that's why.
So you're denying that what he said is true? Yes or no? All right, take it easy.
Hey. Look at me, guy. Oh, no, you can't even look at me now, right?
Oh, Danny, please, don't.
You put that in the New York Times, guy. And I'm gonna kill myself.
The Believer from 2001 was the first lead role in a film from a young Ryan Gosling playing a Jewish skinhead in New York City, based upon a true story of Daniel Burros, as reported by New York Times reporter McClandish Phillips. The film follows Gosling's Daniel Ballant as he stalks and beats a Jewish student, attends right-wing fascist meetings led by Billy Zane and Theresa Russell, engages in a BDSM relationship with a fellow fascist acolyte, and talks a lot about killing Jews. And yet, there is something about the way Daniel goes about being a Nazi that is very Jewish. It is this paradox at the heart of The Believer that makes it both an uncomfortable and a potentially hilarious take on a subject that few films are willing to touch: the complexity of anti-Semitism. It's not hard to understand why a film like this is one the world is going to be wrong about, but with a cast of great young actors at the beginning of their careers, including Garret Dillahunt, Eilzabeth Reaser, and A.D. Miles, and the continued confusion about anti-Semitism and its relationship to right and left-wing political movements, it seems like something more people should see and try and get their minds around. I'm looking forward to discussing The Believer with its director, Henry Bean, and here he is. Welcome to The World is Wrong, Henry.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
You come here through the introduction of my old high school chum, Christopher Roberts, who is the producer on this film.
Right. That's true. He was, and he was a great producer, indispensable person, a person about whom what I remember the best about Chris is when something went wrong, I said to him at one point, "Why didn't you tell me this was a problem?" He said, "Because we have 100 problems a day, and most of them go away, and I don't have to tell you about them." And I thought, what a sensible answer that was. Please don't tell me about anything.
That's a great producer. That's a great producer. And let me just tell you, my introduction to The Believer is that I was visiting Chris in New York in like probably 2000, 2001. I'm not exactly sure when you were shooting this, but you were in the middle of shooting. And
right, 2000.
Chris, knowing that I was a young starving artist and always looking for free stuff, was like, "Hey, we have a bunch of T-shirts that we're not using from this film. Do you want to see if you want any of them?" I was like, "Sure." None of them have swastikas on them, right? And he's like, "No, they're just like normal T-shirts," and those became some of my favorite T-shirts for like 5 years. It's like green ones, brown ones. There was nothing particular. They're just really well-made T-shirts. At any rate,
I have no memory of these T-shirts.
It was another one of the problems you didn't need to know.
I should have gotten myself a couple.
So, but that's not why I loved the film. Then I saw the film and was just, I related to it in ways that I could never have imagined that I would relate to it. And it's odd because as much as I enjoyed the film and have talked with people about it since, it's also something that has been scary to revisit. And obviously I know kind of why, but I also am confused as to, like, my own experience of the film is that it's not an ugly or a hurtful film, but it still makes me a little bit afraid to step into it because I'm afraid that I'll deal with the ugliness or the hurt that is associated with it. And that brings me to my first question for you about this film, which is, how do you think the world is wrong about this film? Well,
the only thing I can think that's wrong about it, the world being wrong about it, is they haven't watched it enough. It's not that I think the film has been misunderstood, though at times it has been. But I'm not. It wasn't. Film wasn't made to be understood a certain way. The film was made out of a certain impulse and the sense of having something to say. A dangerous thing for anybody to have, but I had that, and I. Relatively satisfied with the way it got said. There are lots of things I would make better about the film, but the way it conveys its essential, or my sense, I guess, really, my initial impulse is pretty good. So when people like it or don't like it, or misunderstand it according to what I think its meaning is, that doesn't bother me. I don't want people to understand. I want people to, you want people to encounter something you do in their own terms, and it's inevitably going to be in their own terms. And if those terms are different from yours, too bad, or actually good. It makes the thing a living thing, which everybody has their own response to. The one complaint, the one thing I think that was wrong, was the film didn't get post Sundance. The film didn't get shown the way it should have. It should have shown as an art house film without that release initially on Showtime. And the reason that happened is an interesting story. The film came out of Sundance with a lot of praise and excitement, and Paramount Focus, Paramount Indie, whatever the Paramount version of the indie label at Paramount, they were interested in distributing it, and they went to the Simon Wiesenthal Center, the Museum of Tolerance, who had, the leader of whom, Rabbi Marvin Heyer, had kind of gotten himself into a position of being Hollywood Pope on matters Jewish. And they said, well, let's see the film. We haven't seen it. And I took it over there. I took over a video of it. And the minute I walked into the room of that place and saw the people who were going to be seeing it, I thought, uh-oh, this is the wrong thing. I shouldn't be here. I should not be showing these people. But I was committed, and I didn't pull back, which is, all sorts of Jewish people, Jewish organizations, synagogues, B'nai B'rith, stuff like that, would see it later and think, oh, I get this. This is great. But these guys, for whatever reason, I knew weren't going to like it. And there were lots of reasons why they didn't like it, some having to do with sexual matters, and I don't want to get into that. Oh, maybe we should get into that. They didn't like hearing that Jewish women like to have like to give oral sex. I thought that was a tribute to Jewish women, but they thought it was a negative.
You're channeling Lenny Bruce there. I think you just channeled Lenny Bruce bit. That's fantastic.
The bust. What I got arrested for in San Francisco. San Francisco, I got arrested for, we can hear that, Daddy. I'm not going to repeat the word because I want to finish the gig here tonight. It's, they said it was vernacular for a favorite homosexual practice, a 10-letter word. It's really chic. That's 2 4-letter words and a preposition. I can't, I wish I could tell you the word. It starts with a C. Well, you know what the word is. Now, it's weird how they manifested that word as homosexual, because I don't. That relates to any contemporary chick I know, or would know, or would love, or would marry,
One of my great influences. But what really got me was when they, of course, they said, we don't like this film, and Paramount Classics, that's what it was. Paramount Classics decided they didn't want to distribute it. And with that, the kibosh was on the thing for theatrical, and it was going to go to Showtime. And subsequently I heard, and I felt like, well, they really didn't understand. Here's how the film was wrong. The film was wrong in thinking this film was not respectful of Judaism, whereas I think it was deeply respectful. But this got crystallized in a little incident that when I called those guys up and said, it wasn't Marvin Heyer, it was a guy named, I can't remember his name, Abraham something. He didn't like it. And he said, one of the things you did was you desecrated a Torah. That is, by that he meant there's a scene when they're in the synagogue where they drop the Torah and it rolls across the floor, opening up the text. And I said to him, well, when we were going to do that scene, we were very careful because we understood the risks entailed. And what we did was we took the scroll, the wooden pieces that are the scroll called the Bdsm, the trees, and we got Bdsm that had not yet been blessed. And we got 2 or 3 panels of Torah text, the 2 or 3 panels of Torah text that did not contain the name of God. And we reproduced them endlessly. And that was what we dropped. So we were really careful not to desecrate a Torah or anything that might be desecratable. And the guy said, oh, yeah, I didn't know that. And I thought, they didn't know it. There was some way in which this film, in its impudence, and its, I'm going to provoke you, my doing, failed to convey to certain people the respect it had for its subject. And I think the part of the Jewish community or the part of the non-Jewish community that thought this was offensive and didn't see that respectfulness, well, they were wrong, but maybe that wrongness is my fault. Maybe I didn't indicate clearly enough how much this was, as I sometimes think of it, as a love poem to Judaism.
I felt it. I totally felt it. But then I'm a perverse and confused Jew myself, so maybe if I were a more observant Jew, I might take it in a different way.
There was this one particular observant Jew who's in the film, and it was incredibly important in making the film, a guy named Judah Lazarus.
Yes, the director of Kabbalah Me, and I wanted to ask you about him because he's in the film so little, but he has such grounded charisma in that film.
He is a very charismatic performer, and I had originally, when the film began as a short, that really not even a short because it wasn't coherent, it was a bunch of scenes that I made, and Judah played the role that Ryan plays in the feature, and Judah was just magnificent. He wasn't enough of an actor. He didn't have certain chops that were necessary to make the thing. And God knows we didn't go wrong in our actors. Yeah. Right? He couldn't have done better than Ryan. But Judah has something very intense. And Judah's only on screen a little bit, but he's behind the camera a lot. And the thing that he did, many things he did, but one of them was that when Ryan came to New York to prepare for the film, I basically said to him, you hang out with Judah. And Ryan hung out with Judah, and Judah was very gracious and accepting. But Ryan, who's just a fantastic mimic, picked up mannerisms, verbal and corporal mannerisms from Judah. And they're there. And if you know Judah, you can see Ryan in the film doing Judah. And not only that, but when you see Ryan in his next film, Murder by Numbers, he's still doing a little bit of Judah. Because Judah is an incredibly charismatic guy. And Judah was a tremendous source for so many things on the film. It really, in a deep way, my understanding of the character. There were things I didn't know about the character I'd written that Judah explained to me quite explicitly and changed the way the thing was done. So I don't think it's impossible for a serious religious. Well, Judah wasn't really so seriously religious at the time, but he is now. But he had been. He'd grown up in an Orthodox world. I think the film is very, very respectful, even adoring of not only the Jewish people, but even more of Judaism as a religion. And if the world's wrong about it in any way, it's in failing to see that. But the movie had a greater fate and a greater existence than I had ever imagined it would have. So
how do you mean it had a greater, like you really just thought it was going to be?
I thought this thing was good. Nothing was going to come of it. I thought it was going to be this crazy thing I did. I spent a lot of money, my own money, out of pocket money on that film. But I just had to do it. You know, it was one of those things where I'd go on a certain distance and I had to keep going. And so, you know, I actually got a rewrite job that I managed to take the pre-tax dollars from my rewrite job and put them into the movie and not pay the taxes until I got the money back from the movie. I went all the way with the thing, but I didn't really believe, or maybe I was afraid to believe, that something good would come of it. And I think if we hadn't gotten Ryan, I'm not sure anything would have come of it at all. There were other people who there was pressure to cast, and for obvious reasons I'm not going to mention.
You mean Jewish actors?
And Jewish actors and non-Jewish actors. And I honestly feel, and they're very, very good actors, really excellent people. But I honestly feel that if I'd chosen any one of them, the thing wouldn't have worked, and it would have gone nowhere. And so I never imagined, although the minute I saw Ryan, I said, this is the guy I want. But I never imagined that I would find it. It was the last, I auditioned 100 people. He was the 99th person I auditioned. And I was in despair because I thought, well, there's somebody, I'll pick somebody here, but there's nobody I really want. There's nobody who's exciting to me. And then this guy walked in and did this thing. And it wasn't so much that I thought, this is it. I didn't have that feeling. I had the feeling of, this is something I've never seen before. This is so different. It's new. Everything that he's been saying, you know, when you do these auditions, you do the same scenes over and over again. So I'd heard these scenes 100 times. And suddenly in comes this guy, and I was bored with him. And in comes this guy who does the scenes, and I'd never heard them before. They were brand new to me. And interestingly, when I watched the videos, you know, you videotape these things. When I watched the videos, his line readings, even though I now had heard them, continued to surprise me. There was something so original about him that it wasn't a matter of this is right, but it's like, this is interesting. This is, I want to see more of this. I've been looking for a particular thing, and instead I found something else. I think that's often the way. You know, you think you know what you want, but you don't really know. And then you get something you think, oh, this is what I want.
Well, that leads me to two questions. I want to talk about the casting process, but first I just want to talk about having worked with Ryan Gosling at that point in his career, because what you're describing, I feel like, is true of Ryan Gosling as an actor to this day. There is just something slightly different about him that is kind of undefinable. And I guess that, you know, to some degree you might call that star quality, but I think it goes beyond that. And I'm curious for you, I'm always interested in talking to people who work with people early in their careers and then have this view of them as they go on. And certainly, obviously, Ryan Gosling is a major movie star, actor, important
for sure.
person in film. And you have watched that trajectory from the jump. Do you have any particular, do you feel like that has given you any particular insight into him as an actor over the years?
Well, as you said, I saw him when he was young. He was 19 years old when he made the film. And he was more open than, a young person was often more open than an older person. And so I got stories about his life. And I got the emotion behind those stories, his upbringing, his being on the Mickey Mouse Club, his loneliness, his relation to other people, that fed my understanding of what he did and how he did it, and the ways in which his forcefulness was on top of tenderness, and the way in which even when he was doing something incredibly cruel, you could feel the vulnerability that generated it. And you pick the first scene, or almost the first scene of the movie, when he's beating up Peter Meadows, when he's beating up the kid, the yeshiva bocher from the train. He conveys, without pulling punches on his sadism, he conveys how much this guy's passivity wounds him, his character, Danny Burrows, that in some sense he knows he's beating up himself. He knows this is attacking the schmuck inside him, and he's able to convey that complexity. Well, that was there when he was 19. I'll tell you a story about this. I tell this story all the time because it was so amazing. The final shot, he's going up the stairs and he disappears and you hear his footsteps. Well, in fact, the stairs did not go up for flight after flight. The stairs went up one flight after that. But so what Ryan did was he went up there, and as he said, he said, I went up there and he kept walking to give you the sense that it was going on forever, even though it wasn't really going on forever. But when he finished the first take, he said, you know what I forgot to do? I forgot to fade the footsteps as if I was getting farther away. So this is a 19-year-old kid who's thinking about that. It's amazing. He was, you talk about athletes. They say about athletes, certain athletes, they see the whole field or they see the whole court. But Ryan saw the whole movie. Ryan was like a young genius athlete who saw everything and was thinking about everything. It wasn't like he was busy scouring things. He just had a vision. He had a sense of vision that understood. He wasn't just thinking about his role. He was thinking about the whole thing.
Yeah.
And he and Judah, who became pals, the day that we shot the young versions of them in the yeshiva, with their 12, 13-year-old counterparts, they were there. And they were there working with those kids to make their roles as good as they could be. And I thought that was a really effective scene.
He's not the only amazing actor you got in this film. It's who did the casting for this?
A woman named Adrienne Stern.
I want to send her a thank you note, because damn, this cast is, especially now. I mean, when I watched it, I didn't know where all these people were going to go. Right,
me either. Garret became big. AD became big.
Eilzabeth Reaser. I just watched her last night in this New American Crime Story, the one about Monica Lewinsky. And she's got such. I mean, all of these. I mean, Garret Dillahunt. Obviously, I think he's one of the more interesting actors on TV. Sort of right out of that, he shows up in Deadwood and Justified and Damages, and all these great movies. Such an intense actor. It's funny because when I first watched the film, obviously you hate him. And then you come back to it and you're watching it and you're like, oh, I still hate that character, but I love that guy.
Garret has some of what we're talking about with Ryan. He has a capacity to be a son of a bitch and yet to make you feel the depths of himself. And I don't know, who can say what that is in an actor, but he can do that. I also think Glen Fitzgerald's great. I always loved him, and I knew him before the movie. I didn't know him personally, but I knew his work. Garret I met kind of through auditions. So there were a lot of people who were great. And this is going to sound self-serving, but I think they like being in a movie where they know it's about something. And they're not, people are so, actors who are ambitious in an artistic sense are so hungry for meaningful work. And you can get really good actors to consider being in small films just because they want to get a chance to do something.
It's funny because several months ago I interviewed Steven Schoenberg. We were talking about the film Fur.
Oh yeah, I know him. Yeah.
He was saying that these days it's almost exactly the opposite. That actors are generally frightened of appearing in things where they're not going to be perceived as heroic. And maybe that's and he was talking about how that has changed significantly. So I'm just curious, do you have any comment on that?
I haven't made a movie since Noise in 2006, I think I made. Yeah, Noise. I shot that in 2006. So I haven't seen this change. If people when I was casting Noise, people were falling all over themselves. Big names were falling all over themselves to be involved in something that they perceived as weird and interesting. And you could feel the hunger. Some of these people were doing big shows, and they didn't say it because they didn't want to trash their sugar daddy, but they would say, that's what I have to do. I really want to do something else. So maybe it's not a matter of how you're talking. The thing Steve says is a little bit how they appear themselves. I'm thinking about more what the material's like. Gosh, they don't want to be. They don't want to be. They don't want to be less than heroic. Well, they're idiots.
So there is one other cast member that I am curious about. I didn't realize this until I was doing my research for this on IMDb. I was looking and I saw that Natasha Leggero is an uncredited waitress in a scene, and I scoured this film and I can't find her. I'm a fan of her work as a comedian. She's actually been on another podcast that I host called The Radio 8 Ball Show. And I'm just curious, where does she show up in this film?
You're embarrassing me because unfortunately I have my IMDb open here, and I'm looking up Natasha Leggero, and there she is. I don't remember where she shows up in the film.
What?
Is it possible? Well, there are basically, let's see, the restaurant scenes. There's the scene where Danny is interviewed by the reporter, and there's the scene in the like a diner where the skinheads try and give shit to the waiter, Evan Moss Bacharach, and maybe she's the waitress there. If she's a waitress, those are the two places
I was looking. Well, who knows? I'll have to
reach
out to Natasha's people and see if I can get a comment on this. But we won't belabor this too much on an uncredited waitress role.
Yeah.
But it was just kind of cool to see.
Right.
I'm a big fan of, I don't know, what I consider them like baby pictures, like films where people show up before we know who they are.
One of the banes of the existence, my existence as a director, it's small, but it's annoying, is the handling of extras. If Natasha's uncredited, maybe she was an extra and she came in as an extra, not as an actress. I mean, she came in as SAG extras and not regular SAG. And there are all sorts of rules about how much you're allowed to talk to them. And if you start actually saying, here's what I want you to do and here's what I want you to think about, they're going to start to ask for a bump up to regular SAG, and then you're going to have to pay more money and the budget doesn't allow it. So even though you want to get the best out of your extras in a small and a low budget film with a very constrained budget, you're not free to do that. So maybe that's why I don't remember Natasha.
That's fine.
Sorry,
that's fine.
Natasha.
She's doing just fine for herself. She's doing great.
I'm glad to hear.
So let's get into your inspiration for this film, because it's based upon a true story, but the true story took place in the 60s,
right.
And this is definitely supposed to be taking place modern day as of 2001 is what it feels like.
Yes.
So can you talk about that particular story, the story of Daniel?
The story of Danny Burroughs, as told famously by McClandrish Phillips in the Times, and as then covered in a book by A.M. Rosenthal and Arthur Gelb called, I think, One More Victim or One Last Victim or something like that, meaning One More Victim of Hitler. That was a story brought to my attention by the writer, you probably know him, Mark Jacobson, who's a longtime journalist in New York and a screenwriter and a novelist. And Mark and I talked about it for years, about doing a movie about that. And we never did anything about it. But in the course of that time, I got more interested in the religion we both were just completely secular Jews. But I married somebody who knew that world. And I got interested in it, and I began to see the thing in different terms. And when it came time to do it, we were in different places. But the story of Burroughs, well, you know it. It's the story of a kid. 1965, the New York Times gets a tip that a kid has been arrested at a KKK demonstration. Remember the White Castles? There were cheap hamburger joints. Well, he got arrested at a White Castle in the Bronx in a KKK demonstration. The New York Times got a tip the guy was a Jew. And they put Phillips on the case. McClandrish Phillips was not only the consensus best writer on the Times' city desk, but he was an interesting person in his own right in that he was an evangelical Christian minister. And he just did both. He spent a lot of time doing Christian missionary work within the city, I guess. But he was a first-rate reporter. And he went out there and he interviewed Burroughs in a scene that I've reimagined in the movie, but from the general topics that, I made it funnier, I'm sure, than it was. But in general, he's drawing Burroughs out on Burroughs' anti-Semitic theories. And then at a certain point, he says to him, well, listen, how can you believe this if you're a Jew? And Burroughs says, I'm not a Jew. And Phillips says, I talked to Rabbi so-and-so at this synagogue in Queens, and he said he bar mitzvahed you there. Burroughs says, you print that in the New York Times, I'll kill myself. They printed it in the Times, and Burroughs killed himself within hours after the paper hit the street. This is the description in the One More Victim of that suicide is particularly horrific. And what's horrific about it is that Burroughs is living, I think it's in Allentown, Pennsylvania, somewhere up there in that area of the country. And he goes down to the newsstand, he sees the paper, he buys the paper, sees this article about himself. He comes back to what they called the Nazi barracks, the rented house where they were all living. And he's distraught. And all the guys in the house say to him, what's the matter, Danny? And he says, the New York Times says I'm a Jew. And they all go, well, okay, but let's talk about this. And the beauty of this is they knew. And why did they know? Well, it's in the book. They knew because he was, and this is the essence of what drew me to the story. The essence of what drew me to the story was that Burroughs, during all this time, he was a member of the American Nazi Party and a rising young figure because he's a smart, organized, passionate guy, not just a loser like the rest of them. He's a loser, but he's also something else. He's hiding this thing and he's giving it away. By which I mean he's pretending he hates Jews more than anybody else does, which is the first giveaway. And second, he's doing things like bringing knishes back to the Nazi headquarters and saying you got to eat this good Jew food and hang out with women who the Nazis say were obviously Jews. And doing things like what I have him do is studying the Jewish religion by way of sharpening his hatred. Well, the idea of somebody who's hiding something and giving it away is just irresistible to me. I thought this to me. It was when I was in reading that I said I have to write this thing. And this is long back. This is back when Mark and I were talking about it. But it was the essence of it for me. And the pathos of him killing himself It has in the real story, it's just pathos. He's a loser. He's an unattractive, unappealing person with a certain amount of intelligence and a certain amount of perversity, but he's a loser. I just didn't want to make a movie about a loser. I wanted to make a movie about somebody where that passion for self-contradiction, let's say, was more joined. And was more, and so in a way, what I took was, I took Danny Burrows' interest in knishes and hanging out with Jewish women and stuff, and I built it into a more fundamental contradiction, which is, this is a guy who wants to be a Nazi, and he wants to be a rabbi.
We got married against my parents' wishes. We were married in Long Island in New York. We were married by a reform rabbi in Long Island. A very reform rabbi. A Nazi.
First, he's just a Nazi, but the Nazi world is kind of boring. Then he wants to be a rabbi, but he doesn't just want to be a rabbi because rabbis are nebbishes. He wants to be a Nazi and a rabbi. Only the two together would possibly satisfy him. And while it is obviously an impossibility to be both a Nazi and a rabbi, there's an interval of his life when he's going back and forth between trying to sell the Nazis on Judaism and trying to sell the Jews on Nazism. He's trying to do both at the same time. And in that interval, he's a whole person. He's able to be his whole self. And as I say, it's not sustainable. Once as soon as one side finds out about the other, the gig is up. But it destroys him. But until then, he's able to go on living. Well, I find this very universal. I think that we all want, and I think maybe one of the most awkward things in the movie, and yet something I can't do without because it says so clearly what I want to say, is that sequence when he pictures himself back during the war, where he's playing the father and he's playing the son and he's playing the Nazi and he's playing every part. It's only playing every part that is really satisfying to us. And if we end up having to play just one part and being on this side or that side, well, we'll play it because that's how we know how to live, but we're frustrated by that.
There's so many good and important points in this movie that you're touching on here. It's that idea of that in order to be a truly spiritual person, you have to accept everything.
Yeah, I get that. I never put it that way, but that sounds right. That sounds like what you have to do, and it's impossible, and it has to be done. And what I love about him is that he's trying to do it. He's trying to resolve the contradictions, even though the contradictions
they're unresolvable, and yet he's continuing to try, which I think is why the scenes that you go back to with the kid in shul asking these really difficult questions and getting kicked out of class for it is
right.
I think that, I mean, I suppose the movie could potentially work without that, but I can't imagine it because I feel like that is really the core. And we're told as Jews that what we do, like that we're encouraged to ask questions, but still some questions you can't ask. And
you're encouraged to ask questions, and then when you ask the good ones, they don't want to listen.
Back to Lenny Bruce.
When I was working on that scene where when the kid's asking those questions of the teacher in school, I had two people who'd gone to yeshiva. I had Judah, who said, "I'm making the teacher too hard-ass, much more hard-ass than he would really be." And I had my wife who said, "The teacher's not nearly hard-ass enough." But I do think that in its best Judaism, I don't know thing one or thing two about the Talmud, but the little bit of Talmud, the one lesson in Talmud I had was somebody there was a question. If you forget to say the Shema one of the times during the day, do you say it twice later on to make up for the time you missed? And there are like 15 pages of argument back and forth between this rabbi and that rabbi and everything. And in the end, there's a decision. The decision is you don't say it a second time. But the decision is just the last line of that section. And the 14 or 15 pages are all given. All the positions, the multiple positions are more important than the conclusion. The questions are more important than the answer. The question, because, the answer ends things. The questions keep things going. And you want to keep things going. You then it's alive. And so that kind of stuff, those kind of hard questions that the young Danny is asking there, that's real Judaism to me. The questions you can't answer. Well, there's a lot of commentary that says Abraham actually did sacrifice Isaac, and then Isaac was brought back to life. The father actually did kill the son. That as it were, minority report, that secondary case, that exists as part of the commentary on that famous story. They don't exclude that. There's a whole book I know on that question, and the idea that he killed him. So that's included. The negative is included with the positive in this search for, an approximation of wholeness. That's why I say it's really a tribute to the religion. The movie is a philo-Semitic
So
movie.
when I reached out to you about this to talk about talking about this, you said that you consider this film to be a comedy, and I get it. I do. I get it, but I also want to hear you talk about how it's a comedy.
Okay. Let me. It's a comedy in that you say to people, this is a story about a Jewish Nazi.
Yeah.
For a long time, the title of the movie was The Jewish Nazi, and the believer was simply some friend of mine invented that because you go out to rent locations and they say, "What's the name of the movie?" You don't want to say it's the Jewish Nazi because they might not want to rent to you. But when you say the Jewish Nazi, everyone laughs, or they at least smile. There's something funny about that. There's something funny about the idea. Fundamentally funny about a Jew who wants to be a Nazi. I mean, yes, self-hatred's involved in it, but it's also funny. Contradiction like that is funny, and so that and to me, the more he tries to make himself into a Nazi, the more obviously he's Jewish. The more his argumentativeness, his intellectuality, his interest in ideas, they're giving him away even as he's trying to hide things. I thought that was funny. The truth of the matter is, if I'd known how to make a comedy and I'd really been serious about it, I would have made a different movie. The movie, from its music on, which I love, doesn't sell itself as a comedy. It sells it.
Well, I mean, it's sort of like Danny. The film is posturing that it's very serious, but behind it, it's revealing when you really look at it, it's revealing so much comedy. And I kind of, after you told me that and I applied that to watching the film, I got so much more out of it. I have to say, there were so many scenes that are hilarious when you are given license to see them as fun. The scene when I plan to go through bit by bit, but I'll just say the scene where the skinheads come in to the kosher deli and are having that debate.
Yeah.
In another, it's Curb Your Enthusiasm adjacent. Like there are several scenes in this film that feel like they could be in a Curb Your Enthusiasm, in the sense of, you have the kind of weird debate they're having, the way they're picking on them about their kosherness, and it's ugly and it's terrible. And at the same time, because Danny's there being the Jewish guy who's instigating it, there is something very Larry David about the way he goes about doing this.
Yeah.
You guys know what you want?
We sure do. Could I get a ham and cheese? A white?
We don't serve ham. We don't serve cheese.
Well, they serve white.
What
the fuck do you serve?
Well, that's why you have the menus.
Kyle, roast beef with Swiss.
We don't serve cheese.
What's wrong with cheese?
This is a kosher restaurant, all right? We don't serve meat with dairy.
What about with chicken?
Chicken's meat.
It says in the Bible, you don't see the kid in its mother's milk, but chickens don't give milk.
All right, you guys want cheese that badly? There's a pizza place right next door. You can go there.
Okay. It's stupid, though, right? I mean, admit that it's stupid.
You ever milk a chicken?
No. I want a minute stupid.
You can have chicken with eggs, but you can't have it with milk? Why is that?
All right. Steve.
Maybe Steve can explain it.
Hi, Steve.
Bring in the 18.
Steve, go over here. You can explain this to us. Stevie boy.
Stevie got a stick.
Oh, shit. No. Let's ask him.
Sweetie.
Hey. Got a problem here?
We sure fucking do, bitch. We don't understand why you can't have chicken with milk. It doesn't make sense.
Religion's not about making sense.
It's about the incomprehensible, Steve. Not the idiotic.
There's no way in which we can give Ryan sufficient credit for what he does in this performance. And one of the things he does is he sells the funniness, even without disrupting the surface so much that the drama doesn't play. But you used a word a minute ago that I think is absolutely the right word. It was posturing. So much of what he does is posturing. He's striking a pose. Because let's see what it looks like if I do this. Let's see what it looks like if I say that and pretend to be this way. There's a play. There's a sense of play, and he's very second degree in a certain way. And because he doesn't know how to be first degree, because first degree is insufficient to him. First degree means I'm this or I'm that, and I can't do that. That doesn't get me going. All that gets me going is second degree. And there's something about things being postured and things being second. It's play, it's the thing. A play is a play because people are playing. And yes, I think once you know you can laugh. Leora and I sat in the screenings. Well, it was my wife at Sundance, and we laughed more even than we wanted to because we were just trying to give the audience the license to laugh. This you can see this is funny. Now, comedy is hard, as they always say. And I don't think I began to have the chops to do, I don't know, would Roman Polanski have been able to do this? I don't know who would have been able, it's too broad for, Mel Brooks would have been too broad for it. Polanski has a sense of irony that, he's able to make the most incredible things funny. Because he's making them ironically funny. They're not ha-ha funny. So that was what I was going for. You and I had a brief conversation on the phone about, or an email, about comedies that people don't know are comedies. And the three that came to mind have something very striking in common. And the three that came to mind were Manchurian Candidate, the 1962 version, Winter Kills.
We're just about to record Winter Kills. That's fantastic.
And Prizzi's Honor. Well, they all have one thing very strikingly in common. They're all by Richard Condon. They're all from novels by Richard Condon, and there's something in the sensibility. Well, and Manchurian Candidate is not only from a novel by Richard Condon, but it was written. The screenplay is by one of the great comedy writers of his time, George Axelrod. It was written by a comedy writer, and whoever had the genius to hire George Axelrod to do that, whether it was Sinatra or Frankenheimer or who, I don't know, but wow, was that smart. And there are so many funny things in that movie. That's a form. The hidden comedy is something I'm very fond of. And I would love to, I'm not going to make any more movies, but if I were to make more movies, I'd like to make hidden comedies.
Back up there for a second, sir. Well, how can you say this for sure? You really are not going to make, have you sworn them off?
I came to a conclusion after I made Noise that I was, and I had great authority confirming this position. I'm a better writer than I am a director. And I was never going to, and I could get to be a better director than I have been, but I was never going to be as good a director. I would never be as good a director as I am a writer. And so my focus is on writing, and I want to do what I can do well. And there are things other people can do better than I can, but nobody can write my stuff better than I can write it. And I don't want to, I'm not a young man anymore, and I want to spend my time in the most useful way. Yeah, so I don't want to direct anything. Look, if I got into a certain situation, maybe I would direct something, but
I get it.
I'm not
I get
looking
it.
for that.
I wanted to see Noise before we talked, and I downloaded a film called Noise that turned out to be a film from 2007.
No, it was the wrong one.
But I just ordered the. I really want to see I really want to see this film, and actually, there's a connection between The Believer and Tim Robbins' film Bob Roberts, and Tim is in your film Noise, that both films. You could grab segments of the film and show them to someone, and they would be compelling arguments in a way that you probably wouldn't want as a filmmaker. Tim Robbins famously, or somewhat famously, never put out the soundtrack of Bob Roberts because he was afraid that those songs would be repurposed by actual right-wing fascists and used. And it's one of the things. So we always post clips from the films we cover on Instagram. And I want to take some of Gosling's speeches, but I'm also afraid that they will be seen as actual, genuine anti-Semitic attacks, as opposed to as the satire that they are.
You mean the ways in which they're funny and self-subverting will be hidden.
If you take a 1 minute clip of him talking about why it's necessary to kill Jews.
How many of you consider yourself anti-Semites? Good. Actually, the terms have been imprecise, seeing as Jews are only technically one of the Semitic peoples. But for our purposes, we'll say that an anti-Semite is someone that hates or is against Jews. Why do we hate them? Let me put it this way. Do we hate them because they push their way in where they don't belong? Or do we hate them because they're clannish and they keep to themselves? Because they're tight with money, or because they flash it around? Because they're Bolsheviks, or because they're capitalists? Because they have the highest IQs, or because they have the most active sex lives? You want to know the real reason why we hate them? Because we hate them. Because they exist. Because it's an axiom of civilization that just as man longs for woman, loves his children, and fears death, he hates Jews. There's no reason. And if there were, some smart-ass kike would try and come up with an argument, try and prove us wrong, which would only make us hate him even more. And really, we have all the reasons we need in 3 simple letters. J-E-W. Jew. You say it 1,000,000 times, it's the only word that never loses its meaning. Jew. Jew, 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 Jew.
That could be taken out of context. Right. It could be misused. And I'm kind of curious,
right.
Have you thought about that? And do you have any comment on that?
The film was made in 2000 when things seemed incredibly safe. If I were going to do the film again today, would I have the courage to have him say those things? I don't know. I think the speech he makes, the last one he makes, where he says, why do we hate the Jews? Do we hate them because they're international bankers or because they're communists? Where it's so obvious, where the contradiction is so obvious, not that the basic anti-Semite is going to, even he will understand even that. But that one I feel safer about. The one where he's saying, but when he says kill Barbara Streisand, everybody, even the Nazis laugh. It seems like a joke. Because he doesn't know who to kill. They don't know who to kill. Who do you want to kill? What good would it do to kill a Jew? And of course he doesn't have any. He has no intention of killing anybody. It's only Glen Fitzgerald, Drake, who go out there and do what
kill
he
you.
would do. Kill me. That's right.
You cast yourself as the sacrificial lamb in this film. Was that intentional?
It was sure. It was sort of intentional. It was also that I had a SAG card and we could hire me and not have to pay me, or I could give my money back. And so I was a cheap hire. But yes, I liked being killed. I didn't mind that. There I am 21 years ago. See myself looking younger. It was a goof. And Ryan said to me, I remember when I was doing that scene, Ryan said to me, if you want to be powerful, take long strides.
That's smart.
See, the way a real actor, the things they know are so specific, so concrete. It's just fantastic. I mean, I love it. Actors and writers have a lot in common. They're the opposite of each other, but they're by being the opposite of each other, they've got a lot in common. You know, we do in a private way what they do in a performative way.
More paradox.
Well, we both flip out, but in totally different situations, in totally different circumstances. I shouldn't say flip out. We let ourselves go.
Yeah. Let's talk about the relationship between Gosling's character and the Summer Phoenix character. I feel like that's probably the most interesting relationship. It's definitely the most interesting relationship in the film, other than Gosling's relationship to Judaism and God and Hitler.
Right.
It starts off as a relationship where she asks him to beat her up in a sexual sense, and then leads to him teaching her Hebrew and basically teaching her how to be a Jew. So going from
Right.
I don't know. Well, I'm curious, how do you see the relationship between the BDSM relationship and the teacher-student relationship in the film?
I think that, I think Summer's not last scene, but the last scene with any substance, with real substance in it, is the scene they have just before he goes off to die. And she's talking about submitting. And she's talking about submission as a religious idea.
Natasha.
Taase.
Taase. Lacha peso. Vachal tamona. Tamuna. To make no graven image of the Lord, or the form of any figure, or of man or woman, or anything that looks like anything. Because he's not like anything. Not only can you not see him or hear him, but you can't even think about him. I mean, what's the difference between that and him not existing at all?
There's no difference.
Christianity's silly, but at least there's something to believe in. Or not believe. I mean, Judaism, there's nothing.
Nothing but nothingness. Judaism's not really about belief. It's about doing things. Keeping the Sabbath, lighting candles, visiting the sick.
And belief follows?
Nothing follows. Because you don't do it because it's smart or it's stupid, and you don't do it because you get saved, because nobody gets saved. You just do it because the Torah tells you to, and you submit to the Torah.
That is fucked.
Don't swear in front of it, okay?
Why should I submit?
You shouldn't.
You think I should just because there's no reason?
I think you shouldn't.
I mean, Judaism doesn't even need a god. You have the Torah, that's your fucking god. The book's closed.
I think your Hebrew's getting real good.
I told you I was good at this.
You also have nothing else to do all day, so...
What are you saying? I learned it better and faster than you did? Maybe it's because I'm smarter. You think that's funny? Think Jews are the only smart ones?
Think I'm Jewish?
That's all you ever talk about. Jewish, Jewish, Jewish. The only people that ever talk about it that much are Jews.
Nazis talk about it all the time.
Do they?
Real ones. Hitler and Goebbels, they talked about it incessantly.
Oh, is that why you became a Nazi? To talk about Jews incessantly?
You want to punch in the mouth?
Okay. Let's light candles on Friday. Say the Kaddish.
Kaddish is a prayer for the dead.
Kiddush. Say the Kiddush. Light candles. Come on. We could shave my head, fuck through a sheet, all that stuff. Let's just try it.
I think that her wish to be beaten up at the beginning, which was just an idea that came to me. I just thought, she says, hit me. It's not like I sat there and worked out her character and then said, oh, therefore she would say. I just heard her say, hit me, hurt me, because I want to feel something. Hurt me because that's the way I'll know that what I'm feeling is real, and I will really feel it. That leads inevitably, or not inevitably, but naturally, if I couldn't take you through each step, to the idea that she understands that she wants to submit to God. She wants to submit to something greater than herself. And the first thing she can submit to is this young, well-cut guy. And the last thing she can submit to is a God she doesn't know whether she believes in or not, but that she can submit to. She can affirm the idea of submission. So that was the progress that very quickly revealed itself to me. There was something in Summer that made me feel all that. I met her at a dinner party, and just I was captivated by her. And I thought, there's something, there's something in this person. There's, you look for that thing inside somebody that fascinates you. And you think, I don't know what this is, and I maybe don't know how to use it, but I want that. I want that feeling. I want that person. I want that presence in my composition here. And I just knew from the minute I met her, she'd never consumed an animal product. Not cheese, not egg, much less animal flesh. But there she was at this dinner party, washing dishes while smoking a cigarette and drinking. And there was just something about that, again, contradiction, or what seemed to me contradiction. Something I didn't understand, some intensity that was original to my experience, that I was fascinated by, just the way she looked and the present, this thing inside of her. I mean, when she in that last scene with him, or maybe it's not the last scene, maybe it's a scene before that, where a scene in which the camera is on her a great deal as he talks, and all she does is listen. And she's so good, this is what actors say, the great skill of acting is listening. She's so good at listening. She listens. You can feel her listening. You can feel her, you can watch her eyes follow him as he's speaking, even though he's off camera. And the way in which that makes things real. That was part of what was inside Summer that I wanted. And so the rest of it, I mean, I think that by the time I wrote the line "hurt me," I was already cast. I'd already in my head cast Summer. I didn't necessarily had mentioned it to her, but that's what I was thinking.
So when do you think she figures out that Danny's Jewish? Because that is one of the ambiguous things in the film, and maybe you don't want to reveal it, and maybe you don't know, but it seems like there isn't an exact aha moment. And as a viewer, my feeling is, I feel like she knows that the second he starts talking about hating Jews. In the first scene where she sees him, that look she gives him is one of of deep knowing.
That's right. That's because when Summer does things, you feel them. You don't necessarily know what you're feeling, but there's a weight to it. And when she looks at him in that first scene, she's saying something's going on. I don't know whether she knows this is a Jew pretending to be a Nazi, or she simply says there's something going on here that is more than what he's telling us. When she actually knows it, I know I know the scene in which it's obvious that she knows it, and that's the scene where he catches her looking at the Torah, and she insists that he read it in Hebrew. And she's obviously provoking him, and she knows she knows then. I don't know that there is an aha moment between that first one and that one, but it's happened, and I don't feel the need, or I didn't feel the need to delineate a specific moment where it clicks. I think those things sometimes they click, but often it's just at a certain moment, you realize you've known something that you weren't consciously aware of knowing. And I think that, I like to think that in the scene where she's naked in front of the door, at least, she's naked in front of the door and he's upset about it. And she sees, what the fuck is he, this is this Nazi, what the fuck is he upset about my being naked in front of the Torah for? By that point, she knows, she's realized, she becomes aware of her knowledge. But where the knowledge actually happens, I think it's fair to say, it starts in that look you just described in the first scene between them.
And then their first scene of dialogue together, there's what I feel like it hits on a subtle comedic note, that a bell that you keep ringing throughout this whole movie, where she says, "You're not like the others." And he's like, "Well, basically I am." And I feel like that happens throughout the whole movie. Like there's the scene when Theresa Russell tells him that they want to start a legitimate fascist movement. And they're like, "And we want you to do political outreach and fundraising." And you're like, "You want to give me the Jew jobs? You want to give me that's what his look is like."
That's right.
I can't. It's basically like they don't, and they're not even making that leap, but he is throughout the whole film. It feels like.
And he's saying to her, he's saying to Summer in the line you cited there, he's saying to her something even more important to him, which is, stop thinking of me as special. Mm-hmm. Stop thinking of me as different. Stop thinking of me as the other. I'm like those guys. I'm just like those guys. I know I'm here with you because I'm not just like those guys. I know perfectly well I'm not like those guys, but I'm just like those guys. It's the torture. So much of American filmmaking or American sense of identity is about the guy who knows he's special. This Steve McQueen character, the Clint Eastwood character. I'm not like other men. And there's such a celebration of that I think what gets lost is the tremendous desire to be like other men. They so celebrate you not being like other men that the protest against that seems insincere. But I think for Danny, he can't be like other men. But I think he honestly longs to be like other men. When she says you're not like other men, she's saying in some sense, I see you. I see the thing you're hiding. Even though, of course, we've just seen him in the scene with the Nazis where he's not hiding it a bit. He's parading it around. But to parade it around and then be called on having paraded it around, it's like saying, you gave yourself away again. And what you gave away is, yes, you're a Jew. But you also gave away that you're a person, that you're actually a living individual person. And you want to be that. You insist on being that. Everything about you is affirming that. And at the same time, when you hear it said, you want to disappear again. There's some weird, I don't know whether this contradiction is peculiarly American or it's universal or what it is, but it's very strong. It's very, we never get past it. It's another one of those, I'm back and forth between this and that you never get past. As soon as you're one thing, you want to be the other. As soon as you're an ordinary person, you want to distinguish yourself from the crowd. And as soon as you distinguish yourself, there's a wonderful essay. The film critic Robert Warshaw? Is that 40s, 50s? He wrote a little 3, 4, 5 page essay called The Gangster as Tragic Hero. And he sees the gangster as fundamentally an immigrant. And the immigrant is caught in the masses of the city. He's living in the tenements, let's say. And what he wants to do is he wants to be an individual. He wants to rise above the crowd. And he wants to distinguish himself. And in the gangster film, as soon as he's distinguished himself, that is, as soon as he's separated from others and is alone, he's going to be killed. And that's a fundamental contradiction. Either I don't really fully exist and my life is unlivable, or I'm not fully existing, or I fully exist and distinguish myself and then I'm murdered. That's what you call a tragic dilemma. There's no happy answer. Why am I on that? Because I think Danny feels some of that. I don't want to be special, because once I'm special, my freakiness will show. But my freakiness is myself, and I have to be myself. So I'll be freaky. I love that stuff.
There's a couple of other, I think, really important scenes that I just want to touch on. The scene where the Nazis, the skinheads, have to get sensitivity training with the Holocaust survivors.
Right.
Wow. What a scene.
That's an interesting scene. That's a scene that was conceived to be somewhat different. That scene was really not so much rewritten as reconceived by the other producer on the film, a woman named Susan Hoffman. And Susan Hoffman saw the pages for that script and said to me in her Sibyllic way, she says, that's a scene that Danny has to lose. That's a scene that the survivors have to win over Danny. This is not a scene where he gets to run his stuff. And the minute she said that, and the minute I knew that I had to write it in those terms, and the minute the woman who delivers those lines, she was right. And it was great. It made all the difference. And that scene was conceived by Susan and works because of Susan's conception. She's a very, very capable person, a really brilliant person. That scene was great, and the people who played in it were great, and it just works, and it's got a different tone. It's a little bit different from everything else, and I like that scene, and I feel like that was a gift from.
Yeah,
from
that was it was a great one. It does lead to a little bit of it's one of those the problems with doing a podcast like this is so you watch a movie once and you just like it or you have your feelings about it. And maybe you watch it again for pleasure, but then when you're watching it and taking notes, you notice things, little inconsistencies.
There's inconsistencies there.
So they had to either do time in prison or do time in jail or take the sensitivity training, and then Danny walks out of the sensitivity training.
Why doesn't he therefore go to jail?
Yeah, it's fine. It doesn't matter.
It's a good question. It's a good question. It's maybe if I thought about that, maybe I would have said, have I done enough time? Have I done enough time here to get out of jail?
Yeah.
He did show up for the thing, and he did engage with those people. But that's good. You're right. I didn't think of that.
It doesn't matter. The film, again, it's not the kind of thing you think about unless you are tearing a film apart. Not tearing it apart in the sense of trashing it, but tearing it apart so that you can look at the constituent pieces. So yeah, there's another part that I wanted to talk about, which is the relationship with Summer Phoenix and Billy Zane's character and the Ryan Gosling character. There's one scene that, again, I don't know if I would have seen as funny if you hadn't given me license to see it as funny. But when when Ryan Gosling is talking with Summer Phoenix about her relationship with the Billy Zane character, and he says, he basically talks about how big his dick is. And she's like, well, yours has a tragic dimension to it. And I know she's talking about the lovemaking, but I also couldn't help but think that there's some subtle...
you mean subtle, he's tragically small or something like that?
Or just, that he's circumcised and Billy Zane isn't. He's got a big uncircumcised dick, and he's got this tragic dick.
The tragic dimension was more, I guess it was a comment on lovemaking style, on the the meaning. I didn't think of it in terms of that, but I did think that was I did think when she said that was a funny line. I did mean that.
It is a funny line.
A smile.
And I don't expect everyone to see it the way I see it, but there was something, again, that I guess once you open up that comedy box, then there's a different part of your brain that kicks in. And I also wonder if it's only possible to watch this film as a comedy if you are a Jew or a Nazi. I feel like if you don't relate to one of those things, like I would have a hard time watching a film. I feel like I'd have a harder time watching this film and seeing it as a comedy if it was dealing with, with racism, if it was dealing with a community that I didn't feel licensed to be complex about.
Oh, I think, when I was making this film, I thought, you could do a black version of this. You could do a gay version of this. There are a lot of versions you could do. I think they could be funny. And I think if a black person wanted to make this film, in fact, maybe black people have made this film, but if they wanted to, it would be hilarious. It could be hilarious. And I think you, a white person, and me, a white person, could get it. you might have to be a little broader. I mean, maybe the things is maybe it's. I mean, there's so many subtle jokes in this film that people don't, that even Jews aren't getting. But I think that yes, I do think you could laugh at a black version. If the black version was done by somebody, you know, who really wanted to make you. I mean, Richard Pryor could have made a version of this. And if there's somebody who knew how to do that, if Donald Glover wanted to make a version of that, it would. I bet it would work.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the jokes that you feel like nobody gets in this film?
God, there was just one in my head that I forgot. Oh well, this is one. I got to say, the audience that laughed the most for this was at the Jerusalem Film Festival. Mm-hmm. One of the jokes that they got when Danny reads from the Torah, right? When Summer makes him read from the Torah, he reads from a passage that's. I mean, it took me forever to figure out what passage to use, but he reads from a famous passage in which Abraham is first hearing the call of God, and God says to him, "Go down, leave your family." Leave the people you know, leave the country of your birth, and go to another place I will show you. This is the beginning of the Jewish people, the first lines of the Jewish people. And somebody at the Jerusalem Film Festival said to me, were you thinking about what that meant? That is, were you thinking that this guy, Danny, is reading this as a call to himself, to leave his people and his family and go off to another place that God will show him? Mm-hmm. Well, of course I was. That was why I used that passage. But that's a little joke. That's saying that the call to Judaism is also the call. It can also be read as the call to the Nazi. That's a a deep joke. There's another place where he runs into his old friends from yeshiva. And one of them says, I'm in a doctoral program at JTS. Well, and Danny sneers JTS. He says JTS. Everybody in Jerusalem laughed at that because the joke is, yes, I'm a Nazi, but when I see an Orthodox kid is going into a doctoral program at a conservative seminary, I think he's full of shit. I'm a serious one. If I were to be a Jew, I would be a serious Jew for whom that would be completely insufficient. I'm a Nazi, but when I go back to thinking about things in a Jewish perspective, I'm still an Orthodox kid. That's another inside joke that most people don't get, but it doesn't matter. You get them even if you don't get them. You understand you're in a world of this kind of irony and contradiction, even if you don't pick up. And we do this in all the movies we watch. There are all sorts of things we don't get that are inside remarks for the people making the thing, but you get the flavor of it. Or you have to trust. Yeah. The makers have to trust that they'll get the flavor.
And that leads to what I find, again, after rewatching it many times now, one of my favorite scenes is the scene where he first goes to temple after meeting his friends and they invite him, which is sort of surprising to me. It's surprising to me that he goes there, and then they have this little debate that then touches on Israel, and it has that great actress Tovah
Feldshuh.
She's in this film so little, but just like the Judah character,
and
so much charisma.
Uncredited. Yeah, total charisma. Total charisma.
Just that look that she gives him, and she's
like, I know you.
And that, I guess that's the first time that we really see him engaging with other Jews. I mean, there's the scene with his sister, and there's a scene with his father. Right. But
those are as sister and father more than as Jews. But yes, they are.
That scene. Maybe it's good. Maybe it is the sort of the authority that Judah, who's behind the scenes a lot, brings to it when he finally emerges in the film. But there's something about just that fractious interaction with little asides and the debate about Israel and Tovah's look and statements to him. There's something about that scene that's kind of perfect. I'm actually thinking I might use that. We always use a clip from the film to introduce the film. I'm thinking I might grab that one.
Yeah. It's one of my favorite scenes. It's one of my favorite scenes in the whole film, and among the reasons it's my favorite, one of my favorites, is that I really had an idea about how to direct it, and the idea was really based on the fast-talking comedies of the 30s and 40s, and especially His Girl Friday. And I tried to and I rehearsed the actors to deliver their lines on top of each other so fast that you really, and because what they're talking about is relatively complicated, that you really couldn't follow. I mean, unless you're really deep into it, you couldn't really follow it. And it was like this profusion of words and this profusion of almost like percussive notes or percussive beats. And that produced a feeling, a fast, speedy, argumentative, and to my mind, very Jewish feeling that I thought was effective, and the actors did a great job. And we rehearsed it the way Hawks used to have his actors step on each other's, just right. The next line comes right on top of the first line, and so that the stuff lands, the meanings land after the line is already passed, and that too is comic. And it came out. I like the way it came out. And Tovah was fantastic in it.
Now, when we were initially speaking, you suggested that I check out the works of a Jewish philosopher named Yeshayahu Leibowitz.
Right.
And I read a little bit of what you sent me, but I'd love for you to maybe talk about, well, why you think that this philosopher is an important touchstone for people who are interested in finding about the origins of the believer.
Well, I think it's an interesting touchstone because it's the Leibowitz, whom I read probably in my 40s, I guess. I grew up in Reform. I didn't, I was bar mitzvahed, but in a very rinky-dink fashion. And truthfully, I didn't know what Judaism was. And even after I met my wife, I understood how it worked, but I didn't know what it was. And that was really an insight, but I didn't understand what that insight meant. And Leibowitz explained to me what Judaism is as a religion, which is, it's something that a lot of Jews will say to you. They'll say to you, it's not a religion of belief. It's a religion of practice. It's not important what you think. It's important what you do. You light the candles, you say the prayers, you visit the sick, you comfort the bereaved, you go to the holidays, you keep kosher, you keep the Sabbath, blah, 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 blah. And go think whatever you like. And when I read Leibowitz, I got it. I said, oh my God, this is the thing I haven't understood all my life. And I think that one of the things Leibowitz says, and I think this is a bit there in Summers, we were talking a minute ago about Summers' discussion of submission late in the film, and her obvious attraction to the idea of submitting. And Leibowitz keeps using this phrase, and it's not his phrase, but he takes it. It's that he accepts the yoke of Torah. The yoke of Torah. The yoke of Torah, which I accept the yoke of Torah, and therefore I will fulfill my duties. I will do all those things that I will follow all the commandments, not just the 10 commandments, but the hundreds of commandments that would guide a religious Jew through the day and through his life, her life. And the submission to that is not because I think it's going to do me any good. I actually think it might do me some good. I think it might bring me close to God. But I don't submit to it for that reason. I don't submit to it because of the benefits to myself. I submit to it because I'm commanded to do that by the Torah, by the writings in the Torah. And I accept that commandment. I bow down. I submit to this commandment or these commandments, and I'm going to do them. And I feel like that's where Summer's character gets to in the film, and in a certain sense, that's what's behind the Judaism that Danny is practicing and not practicing and rebelling against. And there's this sense that, you're not going to, Judaism is very clear about it. I mean, the book of Job is clear about it, but I think it's clear from once you see the book of Job is the key to understanding what's going on. It's all this stuff. You don't fucking get it. You don't know why it's being done. Nobody's going to explain it to you because you're not capable of understanding it. It's your job to do it or not do it. to make up your mind. But it doesn't matter to me what you do. That's just your choice for yourself. Matters to God, but that, and there's something about the harshness of that, the pragmatism of it, the lack of conversation that it requires, although people talk about it forever, that's, I find, just incredibly powerful and incredibly bracing and invigorating. Not that I am a halakhic Jew by any stretch of the imagination, but that I feel like that's the form of Judaism that is out there in the religion, calling to them, repelling them, drawing them to it, pushing them away, sitting there by itself, in certain sense indifferent to the choices they make vis-a-vis it. That's the truth behind everything else in the world of the film. Maybe I believe that. I don't know.
Well, it certainly seems, it resonates with something that's running through Danny's character, which is he wants to be the one who does stuff, not the one who talks about stuff. He's like, there's a point where he's like, all I do is talk about killing Jews. I need to kill a Jew. And of course, the only Jew in the film that he kills is himself.
Exactly. Which
is when he's talking in his final speech that gets him kicked out of the Zamph world.
Right.
When he talks about that we need to love Jews because the Jew wants to be hated. And the only way we can truly destroy the Jew is to love him. Jesus knew this perfectly. And in the end, he's kind of a Christ figure in a strange way. And I don't know. It's one of those things that I don't like. I'm trying to get to a question, but there really isn't a question. I'm just sharing this reflection that you really nailed it in some very subtle, some ways that are subtle until it's pointed out to you, and then again you hear that bell ringing through this film louder and louder.
I think in doing a work of art, you buy into, or you create, or you accept a metaphor, and that metaphor has implications far beyond anything you can imagine about it. And sometimes you're lucky with your metaphor. Sometimes you've got a metaphor that really has a tremendous number of changes that can be wrong off of it, and that goes a lot of places that you would never take it by yourself. The filmmaker Chantal Ackerman. No longer with us.
Yeah,
Chantal was a friend of mine, and when I was making The Believer, and was distraught at how poor I was at doing it, she said something. She said, every scene should be about one thing. It'll be about other things, but you don't worry about them. You make it about that one thing, and let the other things, as it were, fall where they may. And I think that is a great piece of advice for the scene, but it's also a great piece of advice for work. There's something you affirm and set out in pursuit of, and there are all sorts of meanings and suggestions and intimations and so forth that come from that. You don't have to know them. Other people will find them, and that's fine. Just do what you can do and let the thing live on its own beyond your efforts. I hope that's relevant to what you were asking me, but I don't know.
Well, you've certainly done it. And in a way, the fact that Ryan Gosling, I mean, you picked him, but at the same time, there is a sort of a kismet, synchronicity, fated quality to it, which this film is always going to be of interest to people who care about film because of who ended up at the center of this film and what he did. But even if he had given half as great a performance, I feel like you're this little contradictory, difficult film would have, like you said, would have remained very small. But in a way, like if we're to believe that there is, if we're to take on the idea that there is a God's will being expressed, then this film was oddly blessed.
Oh, thank you. I think you're absolutely right. And I think, apropos of that, a friend of mine, Larry Gross, pointed this out. He said, part of that is that Ryan himself came from a very difficult, demanding outsider religion. He was a Mormon, and he was a practicing Mormon, a fairly strictly practicing Mormon at the time that he was in the film. And I think he brought to it from that an understanding that somebody who didn't have a religion, and especially didn't have such a difficult, tricky religion, might not have had. I mean, it shaped him along with all the other things that shaped him. So I'm grateful to that. To so many things.
And just because on the show we've talked a fair amount about the idea that a lot of times Jewish characters are not cast to be played by Jewish actors, sometimes effectively and sometimes, not effectively. Right. And I feel like this is definitely effective, but I also feel like I want to give you an opportunity to maybe talk about that a little bit. We call it Jew-facing on the show.
What does it mean? What it means?
It's like blackfacing, like blackface, but Jew-face, where, and a lot of times I feel like it's particularly for Jewish women, but, Jewish men as well. Now, not necessarily having to defend this, because I feel like the casting in this is fantastic. But is that something you have any thoughts about?
I had thought at a certain point in the process that only a Jew could play this part. And I saw a lot of Jewish actors, and none of them seemed right to me. Then I saw a non-Jewish actor who seemed better than right. And so I used him. And I think when you're making a movie, what you want is that which works. I think there are two actors who come to mind who play Jews phenomenally well without Jew-face. I think what you call Jew-face. One of them is Alec Baldwin, who's played Jews over and over again, and obviously knows Jews, and just fucking kills it for my money. And, about whom you might say, he's more Jewish than the others, than the Jewish ones. The other one who doesn't do it so much anymore, but who I think was a natural, was James Woods. And they just could do it. They just got it, or they were something that could read as Jewish. Who's what's his name? Who's Jew-facing? Let's be candid here. You mean you're talking about a Gentile who plays a Jew as if in a kind of cliched, caricatured way? I'm
thinking of for me, I love this show, but I'm really annoyed by it in The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. Is that you have Tony Shalhoub he's great in it, but he's not Jewish. Rachel Brosnahan isn't Jewish.
But Tony Shalhoub can play. I haven't seen the show.
He's fantastic. He reminds me of my grandfather so much.
He can play Jewish, right? I mean, Tony Shalhoub
can play anyone, really.
Yeah, he can play anyone. He's a great actor. He's really, really a great actor. But he also is Middle Eastern, and he can play that stuff. Mm-hmm. I never have trouble with. I've never had trouble with him. What's his name came over here, Joseph Cedar, and made Norman. And every single American Jew was played by a Gentile, right? Steve Buscemi plays a Jew. Richard Gere plays a Jew. All the American Jews in that film, as I recall, are played by Gentiles. Well, that's just Joseph Cedar making a comment on how Jewish he finds American Jews. But no, I don't care. I don't care whether these people are Jewish or not. It doesn't mean anything to me. I want to see people who I believe and who work in the roles. The guy who you've seen Shtisel, right?
No, I haven't.
You haven't seen Shtisel?
No, I must.
It's so good. It's so good. You know what I think? I was watching the third season some months ago, and I thought, this is the most Dostoevskian show on television. This is the show that captures a Dostoevskian flavor like no other show I've ever seen. And it would be easy to imagine. I mean, they're all Israelis, so I assume they're not Gentiles playing Jews. But if you told me that the young male lead of that film was a Gentile, and I mean, he's doesn't look totally different from Ryan, I would say, okay, I don't care. He makes it work. That's all you care about is they make it work. You want to watch them. Do I want to watch them? Do I believe they are who they tell me they are? That's all I care about. If you're talking about characters of Jews who are cliches of Judaism, Well, I don't want to see that cliche of anything in anybody, unless somebody can do the cliche and then give it as something beyond the cliche. Then that's okay. The type plus, that's all right. But I guess there are times, when have I seen that? When I've seen, it seems like I have seen it in Jewish women. When people playing Jewish women, and they're just kvetchy and manipulative, and I think, ugh, I don't want to watch this. But no, I don't think it matters who plays what. I don't care about, look, if you had a white guy playing a black person, you'd never get away with it today. But they're white people who can play black people. I'm sure they're white people who could play a black person. And I would be happy to see such a thing if it were well done. I don't believe in the appropriations problem. That doesn't mean anything to me. I think we're entitled to appropriate anything we want. Now I put my foot in it.
Spoken like a true Jewish Nazi. Okay, so I feel like we've given some good attention to this film. Clearly, I love it. I'm glad you spoke on that. Now, just a little bit about the rest of your career. I haven't seen Noise yet. I'm looking forward to seeing that. In looking at this, I also saw that you wrote another film that I feel like we need to do on The World Is Wrong sometime, which is Deep Cover.
Co-wrote, yeah, right.
Co-wrote.
Right.
Are there any other works of yours that you feel particularly proud of that you'd like to direct people's attention to?
The works of mine that I would like to direct people's attention to are probably, well, I worked on the only season of K Street, which was really a Steven Soderbergh creation, but I think it's a fascinating show, and I'm listed as the chief writer on a show that was unscripted. So whether that's a credit or not, I don't know. But I think the show is fascinating and really worth watching. Most of the rest of the stuff I'm most proud of is fiction. So
is the stuff you've written that hasn't been made into films?
Or that's actually, short stories or that novels that I am working on, or I have published, or I have been unable to publish, but that seem to me the best things I've written.
Cool. Is there anything about the film that you feel like we haven't touched on that you think is important?
I'm sure there is, but I can't think of it now. You've asked great questions, and it's been fun talking about it. I'm sure there's tons of stuff to talk about, but I'm pretty talked out at this point.
Radio 8 Ball.
Andras here. When I'm not co-hosting The World Is Wrong podcast, I'm hosting and producing the Radio 8 Ball podcast, where we answer questions by picking songs at random, like picking musical tarot cards. We've hosted musical divinations for people like John C. Reilly, Patricia Arquette, Tig Notaro, and Fred Armisen, and hosted over 200 songwriters providing the randomly chosen answers, from Inara George and Dan Byrne to Mose Allison and Alan Toussaint. That's Radio 8 Ball, all one word. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts and download our app from the iTunes App Store.
This is Kate Zazowski.
And this is Caitlin Reese.
And we are Straight Guys.
Okay, no, we're not. We're actually queer women. Fooled ya.
Literally no one believed we were actually straight guys.
Your mom did.
That doesn't even make sense, Caitlin.
Join us as we roast straight and gay culture, answer sex and dating questions from straight folks, and make the news gay.
We also roast each other. It's pretty easy. Caitlin kind of sucks. And we have a lot of funny queer special guests.
So listen to Straight Guys,
a podcast that's anything but, on Paper House Network.
Dear listener, if you are just discovering our podcast, you can find all of our episodes on our website at theworldiswrongpodcast.com. You can also write to us at contact@theworldiswrongpodcast.com or follow us on Instagram at theworldiswrongpodcast. And now, back to the show. Well, Brian, sorry you couldn't be there for that, but I feel like you were. I feel your spirit on my shoulder while I'm doing these. I hope you approve.
Yeah, no, that was a great interview. He definitely made a convincing argument for this movie being a comedy. I'm going to have to watch it again now, just hearing his idea of it being funny. It's like, because I've seen it now a few times, and I did not think that. So now I have a whole new way of looking at it. And I think it's really cool that he brought up Winter Kills, because we're about to do that in a few weeks as an episode.
Yeah.
So like it's amazing that he that he dropped that just unprompted. Yeah.
Yeah, I dug that he recognized or was happy that we had covered Frank. The film Frank. That was nice. That I think more and more directors are going to look at the films we've covered, and I think they're going to. I think we probably speak more to a director's taste, like the kind of films, like as a musician, I know that there's a lot of my favorite music is by artists who I feel like really didn't get their due. And of course, I still love the Beatles and I love Bruce Springsteen and Frank Sinatra. Just because you're famous and great doesn't mean that you're not good, but I don't have as much, I don't feel like the need to throw my arms around those artists in the same way. And I feel like as a director or as someone in the film business, writers, you probably are keenly aware of the great things that don't make it, right?
Yeah, I feel that's definitely true. I think it's like because you are of the same group. And I think also because everybody who's creative has made things that people haven't liked and you get sad about it or that people haven't seen. And so they see that in other things and being like, wait a minute, this movie's good. Why didn't anybody talk about that one? Just like I'm sure there's a bunch of plumbers out there who are like, why does no one call that plumber up to get their toilet fixed? That's the best one. Who cares if he has bad hair?
You should really watch Lodge 49. This is the whole oeuvre of Lodge 49. Yes. Yeah, so were there any other things from the interview that you wanted to comment upon, or just your general thoughts on The Believer?
No, I think that it was just really fun to hear kind of stories about early Ryan Gosling. And I don't know. It definitely has given me a new point of view of this movie, just like trying to replay it in my head as a thing that a director thinks is funny. I'm excited to revisit because of that. That's sort of the main take from this interview for me.
Well, for the Instagram posts for this week, I tried to lean into the scenes that were tinged with comedy. So maybe start there. For those of you who are listening who would like to write into us and give us your comments, your thoughts, your ideas, your appraisals, or secret code words, whatever you want to share with us, you can reach out to us at contact@theworldiswrongpodcast.com. You can find us at www.theworldiswrongpodcast.com. You can find us on Instagram at The World Is Wrong Podcast and on Twitter at World Is Wrong Pod. Hey, Brian, didn't we get a nice tweet, or not a tweet or a text? Didn't someone send you something nice? When people send us nice things that they say about the show, even if it's just personally, I feel like we should share them. Didn't you get a text recently?
Yes. We had a listener who is a nice man that I know named Sean Savage. He works for the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences, so he has a trusted opinion in movies. But he said, I am also a Rules Don't Apply fan, and this is referring to our episode we did a year ago for The Rules Don't Apply by Warren Beatty. I am also a Rules Don't Apply fan, and you fellas covered it admirably. Agree the song should have been nominated, and Beatty should have got a supporting actor nom. Such a great comedic performance, and love when he does the doofus thing. I see you've got a Fears episode, but at minimum, The World Is Wrong About Hero, which we talk about in a bonus episode we did this summer. Love that one beyond all reason. Also loving the Wolf episode. So thanks, Sean.
Yeah.
It's nice to know that people are listening to it. And so
thank you, Sean.
Exciting.
And because I'm so grateful for that I'm going to refrain from making any fierce jokes about your name. Something about that name, I had all this Rolodex of bad dad jokes to go along with it. And I just figured, rather, why do that to someone who's been so nice to us? So good for you, Sean. Thank you. And if you are out there and you're thinking, well, gosh, I wish someone was not making fun of my name on the podcast. Well, you can write to us, and we'll treat you even just as good as we treat Sean, maybe even better. But thank you, Sean. Thank you, Brian. Thank you all for listening. Next week on the podcast, we are going to be covering what?
Which one is it?
State of Grace with your buddies.
State
Zach
of Grace.
Carlson.
Yes, it's a great episode.
This is a movie about a bunch of Irish Nazis. No, they're just Irish. They're Irish gangsters, and a heck of a film, and I think a pretty excellent episode. We recorded this one quite a while back, so we were just fitting it into the production schedule. But it was great to have your buddy Zach Carlson on. And if you haven't seen the film, go check it out. State of Grace from 1990, directed by Feldshuh. Oh, and don't forget that our exploration of this film is far from over, because coming up next in the feed, we've got a conversation with the producer of The Believer, Christopher Roberts. Chris and I went to high school together, and so we have a great time talking about the film. Not only do we discuss The Believer, but we also get into Welcome to the Dollhouse, on which Chris worked, and several other interesting tributaries. So if you're subscribed to the podcast, that will be the next one up. And I hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed making it. And with that, it falls to me once again to remind you that wherever you are, the world is wrong. And it is probably wrong about you.
He said to him, Abraham, and here I am. And he said, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of
Not his only son.
and offer him there as a sacrifice.
The only one he loves. Tovah.
You only kill the ones you love, is that right?
What are you doing here? I thought you were an anti-Semite.
Did you grow up?
It's a skinhead.
It's just a style. Avi, there are anti-racist skins.
Believe me, Danny's a racist kind. You fascist, Danny? Yes or no? Thinks the Jews are wimps.
What's a fascist?
You rest my case. He's a Jewish Nazi. He always was.
Whereas Avi's a Zionist Nazi.
The Zionists are not Nazis.
They're racist, they're militaristic, they act like stormtroopers in the territory.
And do you hate them because they're wimps or because they're stormtroopers?
They don't have extermination camps.
They have Sabra and Shatila.
Or do you just hate them?
That wasn't genocide. That was the Lebanese killing each other, and the Israelis knew nothing
He's
about
talking
it.
about the camps Sharon encouraged the phalangists to go in there and murder them.
We don't know that. There's absolutely no proof of
Have
that.
you ever read the New York Times?
Yeah, it was a war. People got killed. I want to know why the Jews are always held to a higher standard than everybody else.
Because we're the chosen people. Isn't that right, Daniel? Isn't that right?
Listen, read early Zionists on European Jewry. They sound exactly like Goebbels.
They sound like you.
Look at just how Nazis did everything that Hitler told them. You do everything the Torah tells you, or the Rebbe. It's identical slave mentality.
Stop! We don't want that in here. We don't need that. Take it outside.
Hi, I'm Brian. And I'm AJ. And we have a podcast called The Director's Wall, examining a filmmaker's career, film by film. First up was M. Night Shyamalan, then Francis Ford Coppola. Who's next? Is there anything to this whole auteur theory? Find out on The Director's Wall. Subscribe via Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or your preferred listening platform.